Madam President, as you begin your Security Council presidency, I want to thank the United Kingdom for your leadership and for organizing this vital discussion on Ukraine today. I also want to thank the Secretary General for his remarks and the other briefers. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to President Zelenskyy. I was so moved by the address he made recently to our Congress, and we are truly honored by his presence here under the circumstances that he and Ukraine face today. Madam President, last night I returned from a trip to Moldova and Romania. I saw with my own eyes the refugee crisis caused by Russia's unconscionable war. I spoke to refugees who indicated to me their desires to return to their home. And we've all seen the images on TV of the bombed out buildings. But what we have not seen is that behind those destroyed buildings are destroyed lives and destroyed families. I met with women and children who had fled Ukraine, who stuffed their lives into backpacks and left the only home they had ever known. And these were sobering conversations. One young woman I spoke to came with her 6-year-old brother who had autism and is struggling with cancer. Their single mother helped them escape to save their lives. But Russia's war has interrupted the care her brother desperately needs. Another woman I spoke to fled with her 8-year-old from Odessa. The father, who they'd left behind, told them there was shelling right next to their apartment that very night. And they very well could have died had they not left. A third woman I met told me that she used to love to travel, but never expected her next trip would be to flee for her life. When I asked her where she was from, she started to say, and then she stopped with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to say it, whether I live in Kyiv or whether I used to live in Kyiv." She was realizing in the moment just how dramatically her life had changed because of this senseless war. These are 3 stories of more than 10 million people, 6 million internally displaced, 4 million who have left Ukraine altogether, 4 million people who have relied on the big-heartedness of countries like Moldova, Romania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and others across the region and the world to welcome and support all those leaving Ukraine in search of safety. Ukraine's neighbors are bearing the brunt of Europe's most significant refugee crisis since World War II. And I want these countries to know that they have a committed partner in the United States. And that is why the United States announced recently that we are prepared to provide more than $1 billion in new funding toward humanitarian assistance for those affected by Russia's war in Ukraine and its severe impact around the world. And it is why we are welcoming up to 100,000 Ukrainians and others fleeing Russia's aggression to the United States. We will continue to assist humanitarian efforts to help the people of Ukraine and all those fleeing Putin's violence. But as heart-wrenching as the stories are that I heard in Moldova and Romania, there are some stories we will never get to hear. Those of the people we saw in the images out of Bucha. We've all seen the gruesome photos. Lifeless bodies lying in the streets, apparently summarily executed, their hands tied behind their backs. As we work to independently confirm the events depicted in these images, I would remind this council that based on the currently available information, the United States has assessed that members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine. And even before seeing the images from Bucha, President Zelenskyy, along with others in the region, were reporting that children were being abducted, and we heard him say that today. Also abducted are mayors and doctors, religious leaders, journalists, and all who dare defy Russia's aggression. Some of them, according to credible reports, including by the Mariupol City Council, have been taken to so-called filtration camps, where Russian forces are reportedly making tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens relocate to Russia. Reports indicate that Russian federal security agents are confiscating passports and IDs, taking away cell phones, and separating families from one another. I do not need to spell out what these so-called filtration camps are reminiscent of. It's chilling, and we cannot look away. Every day, we see more and more how little Russia respects human rights. And that is why I announced yesterday that the United States, in coordination with Ukraine and many other UN member states, will seek Russia's suspension from the UN Human Rights Council. Given the growing mountain of evidence, Russia should not have a position of authority in a body whose very purpose is to promote respect for human rights. Not only is this the height of hypocrisy, it is dangerous. Russia is using its membership on the Human Rights Council as a platform for propaganda to suggest Russia has a legitimate concern for human rights. In fact, we will hear some of that propaganda here today, I know. And I will not dignify these lies with a response, only to say that every lie we hear from the Russian representative is more evidence that they do not belong on the Human Rights Council. 140 UN member states voted to condemn Russia over its unprovoked war and the humanitarian crisis it has unleashed upon the people of Ukraine. Here's my message to all of you. Now is the time to match those words with action and show the world that we can work responsibly. And I share President Zelensky's view that this moment requires responsible world powers and global leaders to show some backbone and stand up to Russia's dangerous and unprovoked threat against Ukraine and the world. The Secretary General said that confronting this threat is the Security Council's charge. It is, and it is also the responsibility of UN leaders and leaders around the world, every single member state with a voice in the GA. No one can be a shield for Russia's aggression. Suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council is something we collectively have the power to do in the General Assembly. Our votes can make a real difference. Russia's participation on the Human Rights Council hurts the Council's credibility. It undermines the entire UN, and it is just plain wrong. Let us come together to do what is right and do right by the Ukrainian people. Let us take this step to help them to start to rebuild their lives. And let us match the courage of President Zelenskyy, who we are so honored to have with us today. President Zelenskyy, I want you to know that we stand with the people of Ukraine as you face down this brutal attack on your sovereignty, on your democracy, and on your freedom. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me thank Ambassador Nusibe for having steered our work during the month of March and wish the UK and you, Madam President, full success in our common work during this month. Albania welcomes President Zelensky's presence to this meeting.
All right, we just heard from U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield speaking after Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy addressed the UN Security Council. We heard Zelenskyy detailing some of the alleged atrocities coming out of Bucha and areas near Kyiv. Now we heard the U.S. ambassador there pledging again that the U.S. is behind Ukraine, supporting Ukraine here, and questioning Russia's role and position on the UN Security Council. So for more on all this, let's bring in political reporter Brittany Shepard and State Department reporter Connor Finnegan in Washington, along with ABC News journalist Fidel Pavlenko in Kyiv, former senior CIA field operative Daryl Blocker, ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy, and senior national correspondent Terry Moran on the phone with us in southwestern Ukraine. Terry, I know you've been talking to people on the ground there. What stood out to you as you heard President Zelenskyy there detailing what they're seeing in these areas and warning the world, essentially, that there's more to come?
What stood out to me was how he did it. He threw this really in the Security Council's face. He said, you're the Security Council, after he outlined what is going on in Bucha and, as he said, in other places as well. And he listed the names of cities not yet fully liberated and the fears of Ukrainians about what will be found there if and when Russians are pushed out. He threw that in the Security Council's face. He said, you're the Security Council. If you can't provide security, maybe you should close the UN. And later on, he said, you have two choices. You can suspend or remove Russia from the Security Council in order to do what is necessary to stop its aggression and stop the war, or you can dissolve yourself. And that call-out type of rhetoric that he has is very contemporary. What he has, he's essentially saying, delete your account. I mean, he has a very old idea, which is the liberal idea of peace and justice among the nations enforced by a Security Council that stands up for the sovereign right of peoples against invasion and for the self-determination. But he expresses it in a just an electrifying, very vivid, modern way. And I think what he wants is for them to stop saying, oh, we stand with the Ukrainian people, and do something. He wants countries to do that individually, as he has called out the United States and others for more heavy weapons that he will need in the coming great battle to be fought in the east of this country. And he needs it done at the United Nations so that Russia cannot manipulate the rules and the diplomatic niceties of the United Nations, written, as he said, in 1947, and just use them in order to perpetrate a similar kind of crime. Ukrainians are calling this an attempt at genocide that the United Nations was founded to stop in the first place.
And Daryl, to Terry's point, at one point we heard Zelenskyy say, where is the security that the UN Security Council needs to guarantee? It's not there. So what do you think of Zelenskyy's his proposal for this global conference to, in his words, reform the Global Security Council? Do you think, how do you think the UN responds to this?
I think removing Russia from the UN Human Rights Commission is going to be a whole lot easier than removing them from as one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So I'm fairly certain that is a diplomatic kind of maybe challenge there. But removing them from the Human Rights Commission, that's the entire UNGA, removing them and restructuring the UN right now, I think is a discussion for the future.
Mick, Zelenskyy also says that the world has yet to see what Russian troops have done in other occupied cities. I hate to even ask the question, but what do you think is going to happen when we finally see results in places like Mariupol?
So, Diane, I'd start with saying, these are not the actions of soldiers. They're not even the actions of undisciplined soldiers. These are the actions of depraved criminals. And the size and scope of this indicates that not only was it approved all the way up the chain of command, but it was directed. And to the point of your question, I believe we've only seen the beginning. The more the world sees as these places are liberated, the more outrageous these atrocities are going to be, and they have to be addressed both with criminal prosecutions, further sanctions, and diplomatically isolating Russia. Countries should decide Why do I have a Russian diplomatic presence in my country anymore? And this is, I think, just the beginning.
And Fidel, the UK Defense Ministry says that Ukrainian troops have retaken key terrain in the north of the country. What's the latest on the fighting there, and what's the reaction in Kyiv, given how close to the city this all happened?
Well, basically, what the Russians are saying, that they just simply decided to regroup, and it's that they moved out of north of Kiev and north of Chernihiv as a goodwill gesture to sort of facilitate more talks and discussions that Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are continuing as we speak. But you know, in a way, I'm sort of happy for those of you who haven't seen those absolutely horrible graphic scenes that we here in Kyiv and in Ukraine as a whole, we see every day from different on social media, on evidence of individuals who were the victims of all those atrocities and war crimes. And for me personally, for someone who's visited all those places just 15 miles from here so many times, and I have many friends who lost their homes there. Luckily, my personal friends are all alive, but losing homes, losing pets, losing households, everything they had, and still happy to be alive because from what we see there, and President Zelenskyy said yesterday and today. And it's important that he personally visited one of those places, this town of Bucha. But then again, after visiting Bucha, he said, and the prosecutor general said yesterday, that Bucha isn't even the worst place in Kyiv region, that we will see much more devastation from a nearby town of Borodyanka, just a couple of miles from Bucha. And I'm not sure I would want to see what is there, let alone Mariupol, let alone Kharkiv and the city of Izium, just close to Kharkiv, 80% is just razed to the ground. I don't know, it's horrible.
That is for sure. And Connor, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this morning that this was a deliberate campaign by Russian forces, that it's not just a few bad actors. And he called the reports out of Bucha more than credible. So how is the administration responding? And what does this do for any prospective peace talks between Ukraine and Russia at this point?
Yeah, it makes the idea even of peace talks really difficult to see. President Zelenskyy will be under tremendous pressure to respond to these kinds of atrocities. The administration has said this week, in light of the atrocities out of Bucha, that there will be continued sanctions. There will be more sanctions. Secretary Blinken is heading to Brussels right now, where he'll be meeting with NATO and G7 partners to coordinate on those sanctions. The European Union announced this morning that they will work on a 5th round now, which could include Russian coal imports if all of the bloc's 27 members agree. And importantly, what the U.S. is doing is supporting an international investigation here. We learned yesterday from the State Department that there is a team of independent war crimes investigators deployed to the region. It includes some U.S. experts, and they are working with the Ukrainian prosecutor general on collecting evidence, analyzing evidence, and then bringing it forward at some point in time to jurisdictions like the International Criminal Court, where there could be individual prosecutions going forward. All of that, revolves around whether or not individual Russian soldiers, commanders on the battlefield can be captured and then brought to a court of law, something that, may not be likely, particularly for those back in Moscow. Secretary Blinken wouldn't say whether or not the U.S. knows that these soldiers on the battlefield are not just rogue actors, but have ties back to Moscow, have orders back from Moscow. But the U.S. is working now to try to build this case, build evidence to prosecute Russian soldiers and commanders.
So, Brittany, how does all this change the administration's thinking on this conflict and how to respond to it?
Well, Diane, I think we saw a little bit of that telegraph today from Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, right? Biden has promised he will not send boots on the ground in Ukraine, and he knows that he has a lot of people watching his back to make sure he doesn't revamp on that promise. And so you heard from Ambassador Thomas Greenfield say that she wants the U.S. and other countries alike to, quote, show some backbone and stand up. But unfortunately for President Zelenskyy, I think that level of aggression won't be to the amount that he'd require, the amount that he really desires. So the U.S., I think, insofar is going to be pushing, like we heard earlier, for Russian suspension from the UN Human Rights Council. That in itself is a large symbolic and realistic gesture, and one more easy to execute than pulling more sanctions out of Congress in a time where they're already legislatively deadlocked. That's only happened to one other country since the formation of the Human Rights Council. I believe it was with Libya in 2011 with the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. And so the U.S. believes they have the votes within the UN to make that happen. But they know that they can't go on the exact offensive. It would be a declaration of war. It would be dealing with nuclear powers that the world has never seen. And they know that all of this is on the line. President Obama will be visiting the White House later alongside President Biden. I think we'll get a telegraph to see more what they think when reporters ask them questions this afternoon.
All right, Brittany Shepard, Terry Moran, Darrell Blocker, Connor Finnegan, Mick Mulroy, and Fidel Pavlenko. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.